see in all directions, but if you're off on one of the junctions, you can't necessarily clearly see what's happening on the rest of the web. Tax treaties are used by large multinational companies very much like that, and it's perfectly legitimate and it's perfectly legal for them to do so. But they have a clear view of their full tax position. No one country has such a view. The countries can see what comes in and out of their own country. They can't see the other things, and taxes are still levied at a national basis. Now, there are two models of tax treaty. They're arranged from country to country, but they're part of competition now. They're part of the tax competition. So when a country is seeking to attract in multinationals, they worry not only about their tax rate, they also worry about the type of tax treaty they're negotiating. The two main people who produce templates or models of tax treaties, which can be tweaked a little to suit the individual circumstances, are the OECD, which is as you can see, the dark countries on the map are OECD countries. You can see they're overwhelmingly developed countries, and the United Nations. The main difference between the two models or templates of tax treaty are that the United Nations allows for more withholding taxes, particularly on royalties. You might think, well, that's a small, technical, insignificant difference. What difference does that make? But if you imagine that, for example, a company has R&D in Ireland, as many companies do, and then they set up a manufacturing plant, we'll say, in Namibia, for the sake of argument. So the company in Namibia is manufacturing and it's employing lots of people and should be paying tax in Namibia. But they're using technology which has been developed in Ireland. So they need to pay a royalty to the Irish company. Under the OECD model of treaty, there would be no withholding taxes on that royalty. So that royalty would go straight from the company in Namibia to its sister company, part of the same group in Ireland, and the Namibian government would not get any tax from that. Under the UN model, the Namibian government would be entitled to levy some tax on that. And that would obviously enrich the Namibian government. If you have a situation, as we'll see, where the companies can set their own level of royalty, if you don't have a withholding tax, it's a license for the companies to move the profit to wherever they like. So they can easily move all of the profit out of, for example, Namibia and into, for example, Ireland. We'll come to why they might want to do that in a few minutes. So countries negotiate generally when the developed countries will hope that they are going to write an OECD type treaty with no withholding taxes. Countries, it's in their own best interest to write a UN type treaty with withholding taxes. We can come back to how this operates a little later. The main reason it matters is because of a thing called transfer pricing. And transfer pricing is the price that's set when multinational companies trade with themselves. So the Irish branch buys something from the American branch, or the Irish subsidiary buys something from the American subsidiary. Now, if you have a company that makes computers, and we'll say the computers are made in a factory in Limerick and then they're sold to a wholesaler in France, which is also owned by the same group, then you can set the wholesale price. It should be set at arm's length. So they should sell to their fellow group company at the same rate as they would sell to any other wholesaler. So that seems fair, yes? But if they don't sell to any other wholesaler, then how do you establish at what rate they should set the wholesale price? So companies will make an argument and they'll say, well, we should set it at this level or that level. And it's very difficult for any particular revenue to challenge it. They set internal prices. Now, why this matters is if you have a country like Ireland where the tax rate is 12.5% for companies, it's very, very low. And you have a country here a company that's manufacturing computers, and say they're selling them around the EU through somewhere like Germany, where the tax rate is, for example, 30%. The company will make profit, the group will make profit by selling the computers they've made in Ireland, ultimately on to a retailer in Germany. How much of that profit is in Ireland and how much of it is in Germany depends on how much they leave with the manufacturer and how much they leave with the wholesaler. So if they set the price from Ireland to Germany as very high, then their wholesale division in Germany will be paying a great deal for the computers, selling it on with a tiny little margin. They won't make much profit. But the Irish company will be making massive profits because the wholesale price is very high. Irish company will be making massive profits, taxable at 12.5%. The German company will be making low profits, taxable at 30%. This is how the multinationals use transfer pricing to shift income into the low tax countries in which they operate. Now, transfer pricing is always challenged by the countries who are being robbed, if you like. But it's very difficult for them to challenge because unless the company is also dealing with external people. If I sell a computer to you for $100, then I need to sell it to my group company for $100. But if it's not selling a computer, if I'm charging a royalty based on my intellectual property, and I'm only charging it to my manufacturing company in Namibia, then who can say what rate that royalty should be? You know, probably very high, particularly if the royalty is being paid into Ireland, where royalty income is actually completely tax-free, not subject to 12.5%, as long as the R&D was developed in Ireland. So naturally, it would suit me as a multinational to set the royalties very high, and it would suit me to bleed as much profit as possible out of the Namibian manufacturing plant into Ireland using royalties. So this is the tax consensus, the rates, the treaties, the transfer pricing. Ireland, as you can see, has used all of these. Ireland started off as a post-colonial country, pretty poor. I'm older than a lot of people in the room. I remember the 80s and they weren't pretty. There wasn't a lot going on, you know. There was a lot of fishing and farming and protected strait industries, and we were a peripheral island and we were very poor. And then we had the Celtic Tiger, and suddenly we had Dell, Motorola, Microsoft, Intel. We had all of these countries locating here. And you would think, why are they locating in Ireland? We're a very peripheral country. We're a tiny island, you know, what have we got going for us that other people have? They're not here for the Guinness and the golf. Well, there are a lot of reasons why they're here. There are some good things, right? We speak English, which suits particularly American companies. Very small cultural differences between Ireland and America. We're in the EU, so goods manufactured here can be spread. But you know, most of those things we share with Scotland, Wales and England, who had the benefit of an industrial revolution when we were having a famine, you know, so you'd think they'd be better set up. So the main reason that they come here is because of our tax situation. The IDA have done a very effective job on marketing Ireland as a low tax jurisdiction for multinational companies. So I'll briefly take you through how they did that. It started off in Ireland, the tax rate for companies was 50% to 40%, but we had 0% on exports. So to the extent that a company's goods were sold overseas, there was 0%. It was called export sales relief. Now, this generally suited multinational firms much more than indigenous firms, because your average indigenous firm wasn't exporting. We didn't have a lot of entrepreneurship. A lot of that is kind of the post-colonial thing. It was killed off and we didn't have an awful lot. So most of our indigenous companies were not big enough to be exporting. Export sales relief, when it was originally introduced, was introduced for a fixed period. And by the time it came to be renewed, we were in the EU. And the EU were having none of it. So they were saying, no, you cannot have a 0% for export sales relief, because it gave us an unfair advantage for competing for multinational companies who wanted to locate in the EU. So Germany and the UK really disliked this export sales relief thing we had, because companies were inclined to locate in Ireland rather than in the other countries. So the next strategy that we had was we had a 10% rate on manufactured goods. Now, at the time when I worked in tax practice for a while, part of our job occasionally was we would have the revenue would come to do an inspection to test, to ensure that the company was in fact manufacturing. Because if the goods sold were manufactured, they were subject to 10% tax. At the time I was in practice, if they weren't, they were subject to 40% tax. So manufacturing isn't defined